Hello and welcome to Tech Deals, Ryzen 7 1700X computer build guide, late 2018. This is an epic deal. For $1,000, this computer is a phenomenal value for the money. If you're looking at building a new computer, you need to watch this video. I'm going to talk about this in detail in just a minute, but a quick summary of what you get for $1,000. 8 cores, 16 threads, 3.8 gigahertz, Ryzen 7 1700X. Wow, that's amazing. A Sst X370 Prime Pro motherboard. It has the good audio chip, the good LAN chip, great expansion options. For $99 after rebate, this is an amazing motherboard. I wouldn't go less for that CPU. 16 gigabytes of DDR4 3000. It's all you need for this CPU. It's a great speed. It'll work in that board. For $99, that's a deal. 480 gigabyte solid state drive. Enough for Windows, enough for a couple of games, enough for your programs. We have an RTX 2070 graphics card. It's the new one. You can certainly go more or less here, but I think that for mid-range graphics cards, this is currently the deal. It's actually half the entire budget, but it's a powerful card indeed. We have a mid-tower tempered glass case. It's not RGB, but it's $59, and it has great expansion options and great cable management options I'll talk about in more detail in a minute. EVGA's 500 watt power supply. It's not flashy, it's not fancy, it's not fully modular, but it gets the job done. It has plenty of power delivery for that graphics card and that CPU, even overclocked. And then we have an EVGA 120 millimeter RGB liquid cooler. It's not enough liquid cooling to take this chip to 4 gigahertz, but it's enough for a 3.8 gigahertz all-core overclock, which is close enough, and it's on sale quite often, so it's definitely a deal. All told, after rebates, this build is right at $1,000. I'm filming this about 10 days before Black Friday 2018. Prices change all the time. I will link in the video description below to both Amazon and Newegg for all of these parts. Be sure to comparison shop because prices change and you might find a better deal at one place or another. Now, the first question on some of your minds might be, Ryzen 7? I don't need a Ryzen 7. Isn't a Ryzen 5 fine? Yes, it is for many of you, but who cares? At $149, what difference does it make? Ryzen 5 1600 is just $20 less. Don't leap over dollars to pick up pennies. Don't be penny wise and pound foolish. I would not buy any of the Ryzen 3 or Ryzen 5. I would not buy any of the i3 or i5 chips, with one exception I'll mention in a minute, over this. At $149, the discussion is over. It's Ryzen 7 all day long and twice on Sunday. It really is. The only exception for Intel chips would be esports machines that need 144 frames per second all the time, and you want to play Rainbow Six Siege at high frame rates, but you don't need the cores. An i3 8350K or an i5 8600K overclocked to 5 gigahertz have a very niche market. There's a very limited market for that, and if you're that market, fair enough. But that's like 1% of you. Everyone else should buy one of these. Almost everyone else. If you want an extreme budget build, if you have $300 to $500, if you're going very low end, you might actually consider the new AMD Athlon 200GE. It's a $60 processor, 2 cores, 4 threads, 3.2 gigahertz, Vega 3 integrated graphics, no graphics card required. Put it on a $60 B350 or B450 board. Put it in a cheap case with a cheap power supply, and frankly, 8 gigs of RAM and just something very, very basic. If you're putting together an email machine and a Microsoft Word and PowerPoint machine, if you're putting something for just League of Legends for your brother, sister, aunt, cousin, brother, mother, father, grandfather, and you just need cheap, that's fine. Ryzen 3 2200G is much better than this, but it's only $50 less than that. Why? It makes no sense. The other end of the market is the extreme top end. If you want the best of the best, if you're going RTX 2080 Ti, if you're going 360 millimeter liquid cooler and huge fancy RGB case and you want premium top of the line, I completely understand. I got you covered. That's what this is for. Just got this the other day. This is the retail chip. The review you've seen on my channel previously in the square box, that was the press sample. I will be doing an i9 9900K build, and I'll be doing it with this retail chip, and I'll be benchmarking and testing it against the press sample that Intel sent to make sure that retail samples are the same. But this is insanely expensive. Yes, it will run 5 gigahertz. It's 8 cores, 16 threads. 8 cores, 16 threads, 5 gigahertz, 3.8 gigahertz. But how much does this cost? $500 plus just for the CPU, $200 for the motherboard, $150 for a cooler depending upon what you get. It's an expensive option. Is it faster? Yes. Do you care? Well, here's an interesting question. Are you okay to play games at up to 100 frames per second at any detail level, assuming your graphics card will handle it, at any resolution, assuming your graphics card can handle it, now and in the future? If so, Ryzen 7 is all that you need. The real reason for the i9 is if you want to play everything at 144 to 240 frames per second. If you want the best, the fastest, highest frame rates possible, and you're okay to basically upgrade your graphics card every year because to keep up with the latest games, you're basically going to buy a top-of-the-line card every year, by all means. Don't build this, build an i9. It is faster. Sometimes 40 to 50% faster in terms of frame rates over a Ryzen 7. But not all the time, and for a ton more money. It is not the deal. The deal is a $1,000 Ryzen 7 1700X build. Now that's the CPU. Motherboards. Currently when I'm filming this video, this Asus Prime Pro X370 board is $99 after rebate. Normally it's $150 and I wouldn't be excited about it for $150. In fact, I would buy an X470 for $150 before I'd ever buy an X370, even for a first-gen Ryzen at this point. But at $99, this is a killer deal. This comes with the higher-end Realtek audio chip, not the budget one you'll find on the cheap B350 boards. It comes with Intel Gigabit LAN. It comes with better power delivery, full suite of expansion slots. It comes with a full set of RAM slots. It's a better board. You're getting a $150 board for $100. So even though you could save $30 here and buy a $60 or $70 board, you give up a lot doing it. If you're buying a $1,000 machine, spend $100 on your motherboard. In the long run, you'll be happy. If you in the future decide you do want to upgrade to the 3rd or 4th gen Ryzen, which you'll be able to on this, you'll be grateful for the better power delivery for a Ryzen 7 3700X or 4700X sometime in the future if you want to go that route. Because while they will run on the cheaper boards, they might not run at full speed because they weren't designed for it. They're very budget boards. So I think this is a really good deal at the moment. As far as system RAM goes, DDR4 3000 at this point works in all the Ryzen boards I've tested. 300 series, 400 series, that issue. DDR4 3200 works 90+% of the time. There's a few situations that hasn't worked. But when I'm filming this video, there's like a $20 price gap between 3000 and 3200. Who cares? You will never ever notice the difference. Yes, there's a difference between 2133 or 2400 and 3200, but there's not from 3000 to 3200. That is this big of a difference. Do not worry about it. Save your money, spend $99 on 16 gigs of DDR4 3000 and be happy. Don't bother with 8 gigs. If you're building a $1,000 machine, 8 gigabytes should not be in your vocabulary. 32 is not crazy, but it's probably not necessary for most of you at this point. The one situation where this machine would justify 32 gigs is if in addition to gaming, you're also serious about 3D animation or video editing. If you want to do 4K video editing or you're actually going to run Blender or run some other 3D program, 32 gigs is not crazy. Fine. Buy 2 kits. So for $1,100, you get an 8-core 16-thread machine with 32 gigs of RAM. That's a deal. SSD space. SSD space is interesting because it's so variable. You can go larger, you can go smaller. Right now when I'm filming this video, these are about $60. For $115, you can get a terabyte of SSD space. I wouldn't go smaller. It's not worth the money. Going to 240 or 250 gigs, you give up so much space and you save the cost of a nice lunch. Maybe 2 lunches. That's about it. Nvme might be a question a lot of people ask about. Nvme does cost more, but not tremendously so. If the idea of SATA bothers you, if the idea of going with an 8-core $1,000 machine just you go, shouldn't I be on Nvme? Isn't the new one? Yeah, but it's not a huge boost for most people. You can buy 500 gig budget Nvme drives in the $90 to $100 price range. You'll spend about $30 more. The thing with a build like this is you can $30 yourself to $1,500 if you're not careful. A little bit nicer case, a little bit nicer power supply, a better cooler, faster RAM, a nicer motherboard, and pretty soon, what happened to our $1,000 budget? That's what happens. So to fit within the $1,000, I went with a 2.5-inch serial ATA drive. If it bugs you and you don't mind spending the extra $20 or $30, by all means. An ADATA SX6000 is a great value for the money. The 8200 is faster if you want Samsung 970 EVO level performance. The ADATA SX8200 is nicer, but it's another $15 more expensive. So $20 plus $15, that's how you kind of work your way up. If you want to put a hard drive in this machine, that's fine. I understand. In fact, this case has a place for a hard drive, and I understand a lot of people do still put hard drives in machines. You might consider just getting a terabyte SSD and not put a hard drive in. If you can swing the extra $60, which I honestly didn't put in here because it broke the $1,000 price point. Me personally, I'll probably end up with a terabyte of SSD in here because I don't do hard drives anymore. Hard drives are awful. We're almost in 2019. Hard drives can go away now. If you've got the budget for an RTX 2070, get yourself a terabyte of space and enjoy having your games download, update, and run off the fast performance of an SSD. And you don't need an Nvme for that. One thing that some of you might do is you might go with a 250 gigabyte Nvme boot drive and a 1 terabyte SATA drive to put all your games on the SATA drive. I've tested games. The performance difference of launching GTA 5 between an Nvme and a SATA drive is a second. It's negligible. You'll never ever notice the difference. Booting the computer is faster on Nvme. Not hugely so, but it is faster. It's noticeable if you put them side by side and play around with it. So you have a lot of options there. And as far as brand goes, ADATA, Crucial, Intel, Samsung, yeah, buy one of those. Those are kind of the main companies that make them. There are certainly others that are fine. Team Group makes fine drives. I've reviewed a Team Group drive. Kingston makes fine drives. I've tested them. But I have more experience with Intel, Crucial, Samsung, and ADATA. And I can just tell you, because I have multiple drives of a variety of different types from those 4 companies, and I've had 0 problems with any of them. So that would be my recommendation. Let's talk graphics card. RTX 2070. Faster than a GTX 1080, slower than a GTX 1080 Ti, but it has the new RT and Tensor cores. A lot of people probably see the RTX and think, well, it's ray tracing. What if I don't care about ray tracing? There's more to these cards than ray tracing. That's the highlight. That's what got the attention. That's what people have paid attention to. RT cores are for ray tracing. Tensor cores can do other things besides ray tracing. They currently just support the ray tracing cores, but they can also be used for AI. They can be used for other things in the future. Current games do not utilize them. Are you buying this for 1 year or 3 years? If you're buying it for 1 year, it doesn't matter. If you buy a used GTX 1080 for $350 or $400, then sure, it's going to be close enough to this is faster, but not by enough to matter. But 2 to 3 years from now, when games start to use the RTX technology, and note, AMD has now announced that they are going to start supporting ray tracing technology. The new version of DirectX that's come out with the new fall update for 2018 with Windows 10, which Microsoft has kind of botched, pulled, and re-released, they're getting to it, is now going to natively support ray tracing, acceleration, and graphics cards. AMD is going to support ray tracing. It is the future. If you're buying a card for the next 3 years, spend a tiny bit more at this level and get something with RT and Tensor cores. Now you can spend less. If $1,000 is not in your budget, or you want to rearrange the budget because you only want to play at 1080p, high to ultra detail at 60 frames per second, you could absolutely replace that with a RX 580 8GB card for $200 or a GTX 1060 6GB card for $230. Those are the current prices when I'm filming this video. Much slower than this, but several $100s cheaper. You could also go with a used GTX 1070, which is in the $250 price range, which is maybe 20 to 25% slower than this. You're buying a used card, so remember you're comparing new versus used, and you're also not getting the newer technologies. But if you want to shave a couple $100s off this build, or if you want to spend $1,000 but free up space for Nvme drive, another 16 gigs of RAM because you want to go 32, a bigger liquid cooler, or a fancier case, I understand. Custom builds are custom. Build this however the heck you want. This is a suggested starting point to get the most value for the money for the middle 80% of the market. People on extreme ends aren't going to be covered by this. And I think if you're spending $1,000 on a machine and gaming is a serious use of your computer, put half your budget, get yourself an RTX 2070 at $500. It's a good value right now. I don't find the RTX 2080s to be a good value right now. They're $700 to $800, so they're $200 to $300 more than this, and they're faster. Not hugely so. I mean, they are, but that's a lot of, you're kicking the budget up. The minute you say, well, we're going RTX 2080, so we'll spend $200 to $300 more, now we're at $1,200 to $1,300. Well, if we're going to spend $1,200to $1,300, maybe we'll just go ahead and get an Nvme drive and a nicer, now we're at $1,500. Your $1,000 build just became $1,500 without trying very hard. So that, I think, is the deal if you want a new technology card, you want something that beats a GTX 1080, it will play everything at 1080p easily at 100 plus frames per second on this CPU. It'll play almost everything at 60 to 100 frames per second at probably very high detail or better at 1440p. At 1440p ultra wide, if you've got one of those 34 or 35 inch ultra wides, this would absolutely do high detail, 60 plus frames per second in everything, or faster depending upon the game. And I'm including the latest and greatest games in those numbers. Shadow of the Tomb Raider, Far Cry 5, Assassin's Creed Odyssey, absolutely it will do all of those. And it will do them very well on this CPU at 3.8 gigahertz. Speaking of 3.8 gigahertz, I mentioned the clock speed earlier in the video. We have a 120 millimeter liquid cooler. When you can find these on a deal, they are really, I got that on a good deal. By the way, nothing on the desk here was provided by any of these companies. I bought every single thing you see here with a single exception, and that's that ADATA SSD, which ADATA was nice enough to send me. But I got that on Prime Day. It was a deal. I got this case from EVGA on Amazon's Prime Day. It was a really good deal. So all of this I actually bought. ASUS, unfortunately, has never sent me anything. But that was a really good deal, and if you can find a 120 millimeter liquid cooler in the $40-ish price range, it's worth considering if you don't want a big tower sitting on top of your CPU. It also has the benefit of expelling the heat of your CPU directly out of your case, whereas a tower cooler like a Hyper 212 Black just dumps the heat inside and then you need additional fans to expel it. Speaking of Hyper 212s, the Hyper 212 Evo is awesome. Don't buy one at this point. You can get AMD mounting hardware for it, but the Hyper 212 Black, which is brand new, comes with better AM4, the socket that the Ryzen uses in the box, and it's like $5 more. So just get a Hyper 212 Black instead of a Hyper 212 Evo. Or if you want a touch of RGB for only $5 more, a Hyper 212 RGB has an RGB fan, otherwise it's the same basic cooler, mounts straight to this. Either of those should also run this at 3.8 gigahertz on all the cores. I'm going with that because it's something different. It's a touch of RGB, and instead of a tower, then it ventilates the heat right out of the case, keeping it away from your graphics card. It's a nice touch, but I wouldn't spend much more than $40, $50 at the absolute max. You also have the option, Cooler Master has some very good deals on liquid coolers, 240 millimeter coolers. When I'm filming this video, it's about $55 for their non-RGB 240 and $70 for their RGB 240. I'll include those in the links down below. If you want a bit better cooler, if you want to try and take the CPU to 4 gigahertz, if that psychologically bothers you, 3.8 versus 4, then get a 240 millimeter liquid cooler and give 4 gigahertz a try. On my 1700X, I required 1.4 volts, which is more than I like, to get 4 gigahertz out of it. It would run at 3.8 at stock auto voltage. It was no big deal. So it's a big jump in temperatures and power consumption to get that last 200 megahertz. It's a 5% clock speed jump. You will never notice a 5% clock speed jump in the real world. Turn the benchmarks off, play your games, and enjoy this at 3.8. 4 gigahertz is a waste of time, in my opinion. It's not the deal. But if psychologically it bothers you, I'll link to the 240s down below. That brings us to a 500 watt power supply, a 500 watt 80 plus white power supply. The 80 plus white references the power efficiency of the power supply, not the power delivery or the function of the power supply. So it's not as efficient as an 80 plus bronze or an 80 plus gold. If you pay a lot for power, by all means, you can spend a little bit more money. You can get an 80 plus bronze or an 80 plus gold, and your power bill would be reduced by a little bit. It's not as much as you think. you'll save maybe 5% on the total power consumption of the computer. This doesn't remotely need 500 watts, so realistically you're looking at 300 watts, 5% of that is 15 watts. Is it worth spending twice as much for a power supply to save 15 watts of electricity, and that's while you're gaming? It probably isn't actually, unless you're paying like 35 cents per kilowatt hour and you use your computer all the time, in which case, okay, it is. Now, you can actually go down on power supplies. You can get a 450 watt 80 plus bronze for the same money from EVGA. I just didn't have one on the shelf, and why not? It's a 500, it's fine. For those of you watching this going, but don't you need more? Don't you need like a 600 or an 800 watt power supply? How can you run an RTX 2070 and an 8-core CPU on just a 500 watt power supply? Easy. At 3.8 gigahertz, that CPU is going to pull somewhere in the 120 to 130 watt range at most. When gaming, it's probably going to pull 80 to 90 watts because all the cores aren't stressed and the FPUs aren't stressed and the cache isn't stressed. It's not like an AIDA64 or Prime 95 stress test. It is not going to pull 150 plus watts when you're gaming. In fact, it probably won't pull 150 even at 3.8 on stress testing. The motherboard doesn't use that much. The RAM and SSD is trivial. It's really the graphics card. How much power do you think an RTX 2070 actually uses? 150 watts? 170? Let's say we overclock the heck out of this thing and it uses 200. Fine. Maximum worst case scenario, 200 watts? 100 and change. A bit. Okay, so we're at like 350 watts. You're 150 watts below a 500 watt power supply. You don't need to go spend stupid money on a power supply just to run a system like this. And since SLI, now called NVLink, but SLI is no longer supported on the 70 series cards, you can't even add one of these in the future. You'd have to buy an RTX 2080. And if you're spending $800 on your graphics card, yes, buy a better power supply. But for this, it's fine. That brings us to cases. Oh boy, we could talk about case choices until the cows come home. This is a very nice case. I picked this up, as I said before, on Prime Day. I got a really good deal on it. I tweeted about it. I live streamed about it at the time. It's a little bit more at the moment. This is the acrylic version of the case. That looks really nice on the front. That's not glass. That's acrylic. This is one of the prettiest non-glass cases that I've seen. Credit to EVGA for doing that right. And that is removable. There's a filter behind it. And yes, it probably chokes airflow to some extent. We're putting in a Ryzen 7. We're not putting in a 9900K. Disclaimer, completely the wrong case for an overclocked Intel i9. It really is, but I hope at this point most of you know that. It does have plenty of room for cooling on the top. It's got included fan on the back, included fan on the front, and there are tempered glass versions of this. And they cost less, strangely enough. When I'm filming this video, the glass version is cheaper than the acrylic. Go figure. I'll link to them down in the description below. But you could also go with a MB500 from Cooler Master. It's about a $60 case. It's got RGB fans in the front, RGB fan in the back. It's a nice case. You could go with a Masterbox 5. You could go with a Masterbox 5. I wouldn't go with a Masterbox 5 Lite. You could go with one of the new NZXT 700 mid-tower cases. You could go with one of the Define R6 cases from Fractal Design. There's a variety of cases you can go with. Generally, not always, spend more, get more. But I wouldn't spend more than $100 on a case for a $1,000 build. In fact, the recent Ryzen 5 2600 build I did was in a Cooler Master H500, non-M, non-P. 2 RGB fans in the front, great cooling, mesh, and mesh. Very nice case, $99, often on sale for like $89. That case was a dream to build in as well. But when it comes to cases, I wouldn't try to spend less than about 50 or 60, and I wouldn't spend over 100 when it comes to a build of this caliber. That's sort of where it belongs. Have I mentioned what a great deal this computer is? I mean, 8 cores, 16 threads, 16 gigs of RAM. I love this thing. I am looking forward to building it. When I'm finished filming this, I'm taking all this upstairs and building it, and I'll show you another follow-up with that and do some benchmarks. I mean, this chip has been tested at Nvme, so I don't really need to do a ton of it, but I will show you the build once it's completed. Like this video if you like it, share it with your friends if you loved it. Remember to subscribe to my channel with the big huge red button directly below. Questions, comments, thoughts, feedback, suggestions in the comment section. Please check the links in the video description. Links to everything here and some alternative options will be down in the video description below. Amazon and Newegg, those are affiliate links. They support the channel at no extra cost to you, And that's basically how I do this. The more you use those, the more of these videos I can make, and the more appreciative I certainly am. So I would appreciate it if you're able to do that. There's other ways to support as well. You can join YouTube as a member. There's a join button down below right next to the subscribe button in certain countries, and doing so directly supports the channel. You get a loyalty badge in the comment section and on YouTube live streams, and you get special emoji that you can use here as well. You can also join me over on Floatplane, that subscription-only website that Linus Media Group set up. All of my videos get uploaded early over there. There's some Floatplane exclusive videos. It's only $3 a month over there. It's a really nice deal, and I'd appreciate the support. PayPal and Patreon links are down there as well. You will also find links to my Twitter and my Discord down below. Please consider following me over there. I would appreciate it. Thanks so much for watching. I will see all of you next time.